When you're hooking up the power supplies for this week's lab, it's important to remember that you're going to have both positive and negative voltages. This means that you're not going to be using the traditional plus 6 volts that we've been using so far. You're going to use these 3 leads right here. There's the common, which we'll consider to be 0 volts. There's the plus 20, that's the maximum. It isn't set to plus 20. It can be anywhere between 0 and plus 20, and minus 20. Now, you can adjust these voltages by turning this middle knob right here, but you'll notice that the readout isn't changing. That's because I have to hit the plus 20 volt button. Once I hit the plus 20 volt button, now of course that button is going to change. Now, you'll notice there's also a minus 20 volt button, but you don't really need to read that button. You don't really need to flip over there unless you really want to double check. As long as this knob is all the way to the right, it'll click. And when it clicks, what that means is that the positive and the negative voltages are equal but opposite from each other. So you'll see here's negative 6.63 volts, and here's positive 6.63 volts. But if I adjust the tracking ratio, unclicking it, if some prankster has unclicked it for you, and you come over here to negative 20, no longer does it line up perfectly. So make sure that the tracking ratio is turned all the way to the right, and then adjust the plus minus 20 volt knob so that it goes 9 volts, plus or minus 5 hundredths. So anywhere around 9 volts is going to be fine. Then you need to connect the black wire, the black lead. This will be 0 volts, and you can connect it to either of the blue stripes on the board. I'd probably say pick the top one because it's a little bit less cluttered. So there you can see that that one's connected to 0 volts. And now this is the most likely place for you to make a catastrophic mistake in today's lab. Double check that this is the plus 20 volt wire. Now that actually contains plus 9 volts. Double check both in your handout and actually written right onto the board. It says plus 9 volts. That's the place to plug it in. And then the third lead is coming from the negative 20 volt lead, and that's going to actually contain negative 9 volts. And notice that that needs to be the red stripe along the bottom. You can plug it in anywhere along the bottom. Right here seems to be a pretty good choice. Now, a good rule of thumb, not just for today, but in general, if you see that this current jumps way up all of a sudden, turn it off. And if you see that any of these overload lights turn on, turn it off. Because you've made a mistake, and the longer you leave it turned on, the more likely it is that you're going to burn the chip up. If you leave it on for a second or two, you might be okay, but you'll melt the board if you leave it on for more than a minute or so. So 9 volts to the positive terminal, negative 9 volts to the negative terminal, 0 volts to the blue stripe.